Welcome to Generations at Work, where our goal is to build bridges and not walls between the different generations in the workplace. Today, we're going to talk about how to lead and collaborate with Generation X,
Which in your opinion is?
the best generation.
That's
That's
right.
right.
That's right.
And we're going to welcome two of our special guests here today from a generation. Before we do, I want to make sure that if you'd like to access our free Generations at Work playbook, or you just want to learn more about leadership workshops or coaching, please visit maxwellleadership.com/generations at work.
Today we're going to be talking with two members from Generation X, and they happen to be dear friends of ours. So we have Colin Sewell and Valorie Burton. Colin and Valorie, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having us, Tim and Susan.
Yeah, you betcha. So, Valerie, let me start with you. Would you take just a minute for our listeners and just introduce yourself officially?
It's exciting to be here, and obviously, with some of the work that I do with Maxwell Leadership, particularly as a thought leader and being the coaching mentor for the 56,000 team members around the world. But I founded the Coaching and Positive Psychology Institute 15 years ago. My mission is around helping people live more fulfilling lives, to be more resilient as they move towards the vision that they have for themselves. So I've done that as an author. I just finished my 14th book that'll come out this year, which I'm super excited about. And have just had the opportunity to speak for organizations all over the world on the topics of resilience and happiness.
Excellent, great. And you do a great job at that, Valerie. Thank you. Colin, introduce yourself.
Tim, thank you. Really appreciate being a part of the conversation today. My name's Colin Sewell. My family has automobile dealerships in the western part of Texas. And my great grandfather started us in the business in 1911 when he sold his first Model T from his hardware store.
Wow.
And then my family's been here in Odessa now for 90 years. So we have a Ford dealership here. I'm the fourth generation of my family to go in this business. But I think the reason that you considered having me on today was really not what we've done, but more importantly, what I learned. John Maxwell became a mentor of mine over 20 years ago. And I would say that of all the people that have influenced my career, he has been at the top of that list of me becoming a student of leadership for my entire career. So honored to be here and hopefully share from my mistakes.
Well, you guys are great representatives of your generation, and we're both going to be bantering with you. But give me just a minute, if you don't mind. I want to set up the generation's data, the one that you're a part of, and then I'm going to let you say, "Oh, delete that on my life," or add that, because you may not be typical examples of Gen X. So, listeners, Generation X, in case you don't know, would be in the throes of their career. Most of them are in leadership or management now. In fact, the oldest would be nearing retirement, but they're really in places of influence. The millennials are right behind them, and then Gen Z would be right behind them. They're often called a sandwich generation because there are two really big generations on either side. The baby boomers, named boomers because there was a boom of babies right after World War II, and then the millennials, which are even larger than the baby boomers. So there's like two hills and a valley. There's fewer of Generation X because their generation started with the introduction of the birth control pill and Roe v. Wade, where the reduction of birth rates just happened. So it affected college enrollment, employment, and other things like that. But the Xers were a very interesting generation. I want you to weigh in too.
I know.
And you will, won't you?
I will.
But a few things happened. Number one, there were three really big marks for Generation X. Number one, they grew up as a generation, with some exceptions, a little bit cynical, because in the years that they were growing up, things were a little darker. The early ones in Gen X grew up in the throes of the Vietnam War, where we not only knew the war was going on, it was on TV every night at 6 o'clock with Walter Cronkite. And then you had the Watergate scandal and the OPEC gas crisis and a failed Iranian hostage attempt. So even though they were just children back then, they looked up at the adults that were leading, raising, and coaching them. And they were all a little skeptical about leadership. And so Gen X grew up a little more skeptical. Not everybody. It's not that there were no optimists, but it was just a little bit darker time. They also grew up as a generation of kids, unlike millennials, that weren't the center of attention. In fact, they were often called latchkey kids because for the first time, divorce rates hit 50%. In fact, if you look at the 70s and 80s when they were growing up, divorce rates shot up like from 24% to 50%. Both mom and dad were in the workplace, or maybe mom was a single mom now, and she had to work. And so Gen Xers had to let themselves into the house after school. The key was under the mat, and they figured it out. So, unlike millennials, where we hovered over them, Gen Xers were a figured out generation. Do you want to comment on
No,
that?
I do. I feel like this generation, we figured it out.
Yeah.
We figured out how to do it. And I think that lends to why we hear a lot the work ethic is so good
Yeah,
in Generation X.
yeah.
We just figured it out and did it. We
Yeah.
just got it done.
In fact, didn't we notice for this podcast when you asked for some information, Xers were the
Xers
first
were the
one.
first
You
ones.
two with us today were the
Yeah,
first
the
ones to
first
send it
ones.
in. Probably the busiest of all three generations got the information to us immediately. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'm not stereotyping at all. No, I'm not. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. Valerie, let me start with you. You want to comment on you as a member of Gen X? You can delete or edit any of the data I just shared or illustrate it, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I connect with it. I think I was born the month that Nixon left office.
Ah,
I definitely remember that Iranian hostage crisis because my
yeah.
dad was stationed in Germany at the time.
Oh,
And I remember being so glued to the news about what was happening with the hostages. And when they released them, one of my dad's friends and coworkers was one of the pilots. And I
wow.
begged my parents to let us go meet the hostages at
Oh,
Wiesbaden Air Base with our little American flags waving. So when you share some of those things, I'm like, oh yeah, I recall either talking about them, like I don't
yeah.
remember Vietnam,
Yeah.
but definitely all of the things in the 80s and thinking a lot. I think the Cold War was top of mind
Yes.
for many of us. And I was a latchkey kid. My mom was home until like first grade. But
Wow.
from second grade on, yeah, when I got off the school bus, I let myself into the house.
And you figured it
And you
out. You are
figured it out.
resilient, the very topic you
And there
teach
you
on
go.
now. That's right. Colin, how about you?
I think I definitely resonate with some of those examples, without a doubt. However, I think probably my background or upbringing was a little unique in that I, for most of my young childhood, was raised in Western Oklahoma, and so there was this farm and ranch work ethic that was very much
Yeah.
ingrained into who we
Yeah.
were and what we did, and quite frankly, we lived a pretty simple life. I remember that we had 3 TV channels, and most of my time was spent outdoors. But both of my
Yeah.
parents worked in different forms or fashion on our farm and our ranch, and so that was modeled for me for an early age. That this is what we do: we work and we leave things better than we find them. So I think in some cases, yes, absolutely resonate. And at the same time, I think that I really saw a more prior generation. My grandfather had a 6th grade education and dropped out and went to work because he had to provide for his family. And so I think the prior
Yeah.
generation I probably saw more modeling of than anything else. But both my parents worked, but I didn't feel like a latchkey kid only because I was out in the country. So I was out and about doing
Yeah.
my thing.
Mhm.
But I definitely
And
connect with some of it.
Yeah.
probably the 3 TV channels you had to get up because the TV was a piece of furniture and go over and turn the channels.
Yeah.
So
Yes, I was the remote
there
control.
you
Yes,
go.
that's
Where
right.
you're the
That's
control.
right.
Well, I want to talk about success and how you define success. I feel like as I've gotten older and I'm a Gen Xer as well, I define it differently.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd love to hear from you, Valerie. We'll start with you, in terms of work and life balance. But how do you define success now?
So I often say that success is a blend of purpose, resilience, and joy. Uh,
Hmm.
and as Colin was talking about his grandparents, I spent every summer with my grandparents. So that was camp. I never went away to camp. I was with my cousins. And so, my grandparents, when they were growing up, it was during the Great Depression. They were sharecroppers. And I was a very inquisitive child. So I asked a lot of questions about what their lives were like. So for me, I realized that they had blazed a trail, that they didn't have the opportunities I had. So I always felt this very strong responsibility to build on what my parents had and what my grandparents had. And I couldn't imagine like living the way that they did, but I had a very strong
Yeah.
connection to it. Uh,
Yeah.
and and a strong appreciation for the opportunities I had, because I realized that they didn't have those.
Colin, what about you? How do you define success?
Well, when I think about success, it's interesting. I think it's changed over time. And I would say that now one of the things that I discovered is, and I share this with my team all the time, that, when you and I finish school, our parents are the cruelest people. They expect us to go out and get a job. And,
Yeah.
and so sometimes success when you first start in life is, I need a job. I've got to pay bills. I've got to get an apartment. And then I think people move to success. For me, and success for me is really about what you do for yourself and the people that matter most to you and the people that are close and around to you.
Yeah.
For me, the next progression in that has been, how do I move from a job to success and then to significance? And significance is really about what you and I are able to do for other people,
Yeah.
not just ourselves. And sometimes it's what we do for other people that on this side of life will never be repaid for. So I think of it in a linear fashion for myself. And for me, I always tell people that the goal is to go from job to success to significance.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
as you and I move throughout life, we find that there are certain things that are more important to us today than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's been a constant movement that looks very different. But ultimately, for me, for many of us, I've always said that for me, though, my personal success, and I learned this from my mentor, so this won't be unfamiliar to you, is to make sure that the people closest to me know me and love me the most.
Yeah.
If our greatest fans are strangers, and the people that are frustrated with us are the ones closest to us, that's hard. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's always been to make sure that I really have made an impact on the people closest to me in a positive way. And as a result, they're able to go out and make, a greater positive effect
I
to
love
the
that.
people around them.
And
Yeah.
And
leading
so
by
maybe
example.
it's kind of hanging on greater things than I have done, shall you will do.
Yeah, that's good. I love it. It reminds me of that phrase, if it doesn't work at home, don't export it, right? Um,
That's a
in
good
fact,
one.
I just heard Denzel Washington say something. He said, my life's been in three parts. The first part, I learn. The second part, I earn. The third part, I return. And that's the significant part, Colin, that you just mentioned, the significance part. So I love that. So you guys know we're talking to different generations. You guys are representatives of Gen X. What do you wish other generations knew about you and perhaps your demographic that maybe the younger or the older don't understand? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I feel like we're kind of an in-between generation. I love being Gen X. It seems to come up on a weekly basis for one reason or
Yeah,
another.
yeah,
We've got two Gen Zers, 20 and 17, and
yep.
a Gen Alpha. Our son is
Wow.
10. Um, what we were saying earlier about being able to get things done, I think we're a very flexible, very resilient generation. I also think there are a lot of things that we were the guinea pigs for. And I think that is part of our resilience. I mean, the women's movement kind of happened, and we were the first
Yeah,
generation after that. What did that look like for it to be very common to have two parents outside of the home? And I think there was a lot on our shoulders in terms of what, as women, what we would be able to accomplish. We're the first full generation after the civil rights movement. Integration was very normal for us. And I think that's influenced how we've shown up in the world. Um, so I think it's more that we're very flexible. I we remember the floppy disks and technology becoming kind of a part of what we do, but I think
yeah,
we're comfortable moving into those new things. There's one thing I remember being in high school, and I had a German teacher who was going on and on about this disc. He kept talking about discs, and he brings this disc into class, and we're like, he's such a nerd, and,
yeah,
and he's
yeah,
explaining to us like, this is the wave of the future. So I think,
yeah, yeah,
we heard a lot of things were going to happen, and then we've seen them
Mhm.
happen, and we've had to adapt and adjust. But I think we're very good at doing that. And I think also, I mean, at least from my perspective, I find us to be fairly open and somewhat empathetic to these younger generations,
hmm,
because we recognize there are things they're dealing with that we never
yeah,
had to deal with. And I think it's important to be cognizant of that,
Yeah, that's
not
good.
just, oh, these youngsters, because
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
done to
yeah.
us. Remember when we were slackers? Uh,
Yep.
and the fact that they actually put a label on us like X because they didn't even think we were deserving of of a real label. So
Little did they know. Little did
little
they
did they
know.
know. Yes.
I think it's interesting you said, we dealt with both. We dealt with the before the cell phone, smartphone.
Yeah,
So we knew that.
yeah.
But then we dealt with the afterwards where we were talking to Generation Zs and like,
Hmm.
we never knew before.
Yeah,
So the Generation X, I think, has a unique perspective.
in the middle.
They've
Yes.
seen the both sides. And
Yeah,
that just it clicked for me the way you said it.
no doubt.
All right, Colin, what about you?
It's interesting as I've listened to you talk. I don't know that I've ever assigned a label or a belief around like my generation
Yeah,
for myself personally, because I think that have I made a decision early in my career that I would be a lifelong learner, which means that I would learn from people of all walks of life and
yeah,
everybody that I was around. And so I don't think that I ever ascribed to it. I always said that I just want to learn, which means
yeah,
that I can
yeah,
learn from anybody in the room. And then I really try to understand their point of view.
yeah.
So when I think about one of the gentlemen that I work with is like my second dad. He's turned 86 on Saturday. He's still at
Wow.
work every morning at 6:45.
Yeah,
So when I think about what he has modeled for me throughout his entire life, as an example, it is to never be late. So if we have a
yeah,
7:30 meeting, he's going to be there at 7:15 because his whole
yep,
life says that, his validity is that I'm always on time.
yeah,
And then if I have somebody who's 25 years old and they roll in and they're 10 minutes late because Starbucks was backed up,
yeah,
then that makes sense to them. And I go, okay, let me understand
yeah,
that process and where their thought is on why that makes sense and it's okay. Or when we had this whole big movement of people wanting to work virtually for various reasons, like I had to really understand, like help me understand the concept of that. So
yeah,
for me, I see it at best as a bridge of trying to understand
yeah,
all those different points of view, so then I can help form my own and establish an opinion after that. So that's really kind of the way I've seen it
mhm.
and play out in my life.
Yeah, that's good.
That's so good. A lot of generational Xers and even boomers don't think that way.
Yeah,
They
it's
think
true.
about the whiff and what's in it for them and why aren't you doing it like I used to do it?
Yeah, yeah,
And that's really the theme of this podcast. How do we build bridges instead of walls with the
yeah,
different generations? Now, we have millions of Gen Xers now in leadership positions. You both run successful companies. How do you view younger team members today and why? Just
mhm.
on your team, Colin, you gave us a little bit of insight, but Valorie, I'm going to start with you and just ask, as even your children as younger, but how do you view these younger generations within your organizations, and then how do you motivate them?
I want to emphasize something that Colin said that really resonates, which is I do think it's hard to kind of label or figure out what we
Yes,
all
sure.
have in common, but that idea of being a bridge, I think, is very, very
Right.
relevant,
Yeah,
because we really are the bridge um, between the pre-technology and now technology.
yes,
When I'm
yeah,
looking at younger people on my team, which is most people on my team, um, I see a lot of potential. Um, I see it the same way with really anyone. I'm always looking for what is this person's strengths?
hmm,
What is the unique way that they can contribute to this team? How can we leverage those strengths? Because when people are operating within their strengths, typically that's when they are most alive. That's when they're going to be most creative. That's when they're most committed. So for me as a leader, the most important thing has always been having an understanding of what lights someone up before we ever even hire
yeah,
them.
yeah,
How do they want to contribute? And do we have a place where they can contribute in that way and help lift us to the next level? So
yeah,
when I'm looking at that younger person, that's really what I'm looking for. What's your purpose? What's your unique gift or talent? What gets you excited? And then also within our organization specifically, like, do you believe in what we do? Because
yeah,
we're all
yes,
about helping people get better. And if you're not excited by personal growth or leadership or coaching, it probably
right.
doesn't matter what your strengths are because you're not going to be excited about using
Yeah,
them for what we're trying to do.
yeah. It may be hard for them to show up on time because they're not really passionate about the work in the first
And I
place.
have a question for that. And based
Sure.
on research, based on both of you, and Colin, I want to hear from you too. Do you feel that's most of Generation X, or do you feel because you are such stewards of servant leadership and curiosity and I mean, do you think this is indicative of Generation X that they're more like that?
Not necessarily. I think that's something you discover with time,
Yeah.
and
You
that
know,
that's
so
cross-generational.
yeah, let me jump in real quick. As I heard both of you talk, I loved what you said. The last thing we want to do is stereotype generations. Our goal is not to stereotype, but to understand. So maybe a better term is life station. You guys are both in a life station where a good chunk of your careers in the past, not all, but you're in a station that maybe a 22-year-old might not quite understand just because they're budding as a new professional. So given that term, your life station, I think you both have accumulated a little bit of wisdom over time. And maybe there's a listener right now in their 20s trying to figure this whole thing out. What could you say to help them? And either one of you can jump in.
Yeah, Tim, I think a couple of things. One is I would say, so when we have new people that come on the team, I love working with young people. I
Yeah.
love the fact that they have energy, that they're excited, that they have questions, that they don't agree with the way we do things. Like I'm really intrigued. I'm like, well, tell me more. Like, why is that? And I think that starts from a leadership perspective that you and I have to be excited about that curiosity and the questioning of processes or beliefs, not frustrated by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I say when people ask questions, like we shouldn't get frustrated, we should get excited they were curious enough to ask.
Yes, that's right.
And so if we understand it from the right perspective, then that makes a difference. And for me, I think it's also been about the progress that I talked about going from success to significance. So
Yeah.
if I see people as a tool, then I will treat them that way and I will get frustrated when they don't operate that way, right?
Yeah.
But if I see myself as the tool to help someone else to lever my strengths and giftedness to make them all that they were called to be and all that they want to be, then I don't get frustrated when they ask those questions. I understand
Yeah.
that I'm the tool. I'm the one that is supposed to be serving them and helping them grow and find all the fulfillment that they need in their career.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's really understanding the excitement of young people. And the tension that I manage every day is the young people on our team that I love and I'm so excited to have here, and the more tenured people that I have here that are frustrated with,
Yeah.
which is why I say to the tenured people, don't you remember when you asked dumb questions too?
Yeah.
Right? Meaning you were in that person's spotlight
Yep.
and you asked a question that somebody else thought was dumb. So the choice is, do you want to stop that cycle and really help them and develop them, or do you want to repeat the cycle?
Yeah.
And so that's really the approach that we take with our team and kind of the culture that I've tried to really build into our organization, which I don't necessarily think is a generational thing. I
Right.
believe that it's a choice and life experience that has
Yeah.
created this mindset for me.
Yeah.
And then
You're
the final
right.
thing I would say is I remember being the young person and
Yes.
asking all those questions. And I remember the few people that would answer them for me and the others that would patronize me and pat me on the head. And I just remembered saying, I'll never be that person.
Yeah.
Like when somebody asks me a question that seems, dumb or doesn't make sense, no. I'm going to answer it for you because I want to help you understand.
Yeah.
And today's generation more than ever wants to know the why behind the what.
Yep.
And so for me, it's always about connecting people back to our vision and our purpose of this is why we do what we do.
Yep.
Because if I can help you understand how I think, then you'll need me less and less.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, it's the reason forever churches, had the WWJD bracelets for everyone. They were trying to say, how does Jesus think so we can help you think that way too.
You lead multi-generations in your organization, and the word connection, that relationship. As a Gen Xer, how do you go about connecting with the different generations just so that you can become more effective in the work environment?
I think it's really important to listen. Everybody wants to feel heard, and I think we live in a world where few of us ever really experience feeling heard. People are multitasking, they're busy, they're distracted a lot. So I think when we listen, when people really feel heard, they feel respected. And I think a lot of times, especially when we talk about conflict between generations, the youngest generation is probably the one that feels the least amount of respect So when you're willing to listen to a perspective, doesn't mean you're necessarily going to go in that direction with a decision,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it does mean you're worth listening to, which means
Yeah.
I value you. I also think you've got to give people an opportunity to try and to grow. So when you see that someone has potential, right, giving them that opportunity to move. Sometimes it's doing something a bit more independently so that they're growing more into the role that you need them to be in. Sometimes you got to have some guardrails along the way, but I think that's really important. I think a lot of what a younger generation is looking for is not only purpose; they want to know that what they're doing matters, but an opportunity to do more. So I think respect. I think listening is really important. And I think it really is important to be intentional about helping people grow into their potential by giving them the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
I love that. And so as a Gen Xer, if I have a Gen Y or a Gen Zer, I need to look for potential, coach to that potential
Yeah.
versus where they currently are and be frustrated where they are, but look for the potential in them.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Right.
Perfect. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Yeah. So one of the questions we wanted to pose to the two of you as members of Gen X is this. You have seen both sides, the old and the new, the 20th and the 21st centuries in your career. How do you balance traditional values that you might say, I do embrace those traditional values, those virtues, those work ethic, etc., with what's coming, which may not be similar or identical in any way? For instance, we hear a lot of Gen Xers or boomers say, punctuality is a value. We start, show up on time, etc. A Gen Zer might come in and they're not bad people. They might show up 10 minutes late, go, I'm here. I'm here. How do you balance that? And Colin, let me start with you and then Valerie will go to you.
It's a great question. And yes, I've struggled with that in different ways, and I've seen it happen in my career now. I think that the common value is respect for one another. And so, where if we have somebody who doesn't value punctuality and another person who thinks that it is mission critical, I think both sides have to have an understanding of common respect for one another, and I think that value is something that will transcend generations. If we truly want to be part of a team, if we really want to have value for one another and add value to one another, then that means we have to respect people for what's important for them,
Yeah.
not just what's important for us. And so to me, that's the common anchor in everything that we're trying to teach, is to get people to understand the value of respecting other people so that in turn, they respect you. I mean, I used to use Zig Ziglar's quote all the time. It doesn't even resonate with people anymore, but Zig Ziglar was made famous for, he said, if you'll help enough people get what they want out of life, they'll help you get what you want out of life. Well, the order mattered. And so that's why respect still matters today. If I want to be respected, the first thing I have to do is show respect. And that's understanding people's currency and the values of their own life.
Yeah, that's good.
Practicing the law of connection.
Yeah, that's right.
Very good.
Valerie?
There's so much to unpack in what he just said. And I think a lot of it is some of these things when he said, for example, in order to be respected, you need to first offer respect. Like my parents said that to me multiple times as I was growing up.
Yeah.
Now they said others need to respect you, but they always made really clear that starts with how you treat them.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that some of these things are taught like this now. You might have a few young people that grew up with that, and sometimes you'll find that they have an older parent, like my brother who's 20 years younger, that was raised by a boomer, right? So I think one of the biggest issues that we've talked about here is this younger generation being very tuned into the why.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to be clear about values within an organization, but also why do those values matter? Because that's, I think, where people are more likely to buy in. Why do we operate in this way at this organization? Well, here's why, right? So, I mean, it's not a perfect fix, but I do think it matters because otherwise it's just you telling people this is how it is and that's it. And I don't think they respond the way a boomer or even a Gen Xer might respond to that because it's authority and this is what my company says. They want to know, but why? I don't think it makes any sense. It doesn't really matter if I'm at work or I'm in my living room doing my work. So why? Why does this value matter? And I think it is respectful to
in a
talk with
respect
team
way.
Yeah.
members about the why. I do that with my own kids. Why do we have this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about why we
So
value
true.
this.
Yeah.
They feel
That's so
more,
true.
they feel, I think, more validated
Yes.
too. And like, I want to know your opinion.
Yeah. To be a
and
part of that
part of that.
conversation. Yeah.
All right. I have one last question. And this is a good one. What's your biggest hope and your biggest fear for the future?
I think they're both one and the same. And that is my biggest hope for the future is this continued desire for human connection and feeling like people have a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
And my biggest fear is
Yeah.
that with the continued progress of technology and the apparent or perceived need of needing people less because of what technology will do for them, that they will lose that very connection.
Mhm.
In my business,
Yeah.
I say that we're in the memory making business. And what I mean by that is that the vehicles that people purchase from us are where some of the greatest conversations in life happen. It's where some of the best memories
Yeah.
are made. I can tell you the car I was driving the day on August the 25th when I drove my wife to the hospital for our first son to be born. I can tell you where I was standing when my
Yeah.
16-year-old got his first vehicle and got his driver's license. The things that we do create those connections and those memories. And so my concern is that technology falsely allows people to believe they
Yeah.
need less of that. And my greatest hope, I think, is the more that people use technology, the greater value they'll aspire to having those human connections
Yeah.
and understand that that really is what makes our hearts full and make us feel fulfilled and how we feel like we understand going from success to significance.
You
Yeah. That's good.
And you just hit it from like, I'm a person of experiences. I love experiences with people. That's what is
Hmm.
big for me too as a Gen Xer.
Yeah.
All right, Valorie, how about you?
I don't know how this happens, but my biggest hope really is that we can see how much as human beings we have in common,
Yeah.
that we can find that common ground. I really believe as a Gen Xer, one of the things that if you'd asked me 30 years ago, I probably couldn't have even answered. But it's one of the beautiful things about growing up in mostly the 80s, late 70s to 80s, is there were so many common experiences that we had. Because there were only 3 major networks and then 4 by the late 80s, we watched the same TV shows on the same night. There was no
Yeah.
binge watching anything, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there was always this collective experience. There weren't multiple places to get your news. You turned on the evening news, you had pretty
Yeah.
much 3 choices. And so what that meant is that together we did have a lot of common ground, common experience, and we weren't divided into all these, separate groups. And I think that is probably one of the biggest stressors today. And I don't know where it leads going into the future. So my
Yeah.
hope is that we can begin to see what we have in common, because ultimately we generally want the same kinds of things. And that
Yeah.
goes back to connection. And the more
Yeah.
disconnected we feel, I feel like the more detriment that does to us individually
Yeah.
and as a society as a whole.
No doubt.
Wow.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tremendous conversation.
Yep.
Thank
It
you.
really was.
I want to thank both of our guests, Valorie and Colin, for being here today. Dr. Elmore here. As we wrap up, just a reminder, if you want to download our free Generations at Work playbook, or if you want to learn about leadership, workshops of how to lead multi-generations, visit maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. Thank you so much for being here with you today, and we'll catch you on the next podcast.